You ready to do this? Let me just get one more cup of coffee.
It's a little earlier out there.
Sip of coffee. Yeah, it is. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited today to have as my guests Jill Shanteau and Jessica Culp, Trauma Therapist 2.0 members, longtime members. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So Jill is a licensed clinical social worker employed as a therapist at the Harry S Truman VA in Columbia, Missouri. Jill always endeavored to be a therapist. It wasn't until 2014, however, after facing some personal and family challenges, that she relocated from Virginia to Missouri and began taking the steps to eventually earn full clinical licensure in 2017. As a former Department of the Army civilian employee at the Pentagon, Jill became intimately familiar with struggles that service members face as they return from deployment or make the challenging transition from the military into the civilian community. Now, with 5 years of experience at Veterans Affairs, Jill has spent a majority of her social work career servicing service members, veterans, and their families. Jessica is a licensed trauma counselor at Steadfast Center LLC in Urbana, Illinois, and a 2018 Master's of Counseling graduate from Lincoln Christian University. Steadfast Center is a new practice in Central Illinois, specializing in helping individuals heal from relational and complex trauma. This is Jessica's second career after receiving her bachelor's degree in communications in 2003 and working in the marketing and resource development field for 3 local nonprofit organizations that included a food bank, children's home, and a crisis nursery. Jessica has been listening to the Trauma Therapist Podcast since she began her studies in counseling in 2015 and joined Trauma Therapist 2.0 in December of 2016. All right. So it's awesome, really, to have both of you on here. It's been a long time coming, but again, welcome. Share with us first, Jill, where you're from originally and where you're calling from right now.
Sure. So originally I'm from Manhattan, Kansas, and I moved to Columbia, Missouri in late 2014 from Arlington, Virginia. So I came here sort of back to the Midwest from the concrete jungle that is the outside our metropolitan DC area.
Nice. And how about you, Jessica?
Yeah, I was born in East Central Illinois, and I am in East Central Illinois.
Okay.
My whole life here. Very, very exciting.
Okay. So before we, we're recording here, I had asked you both how this came about, and I want people to hear that, how this episode came about. So one of you share that, how this has come about.
Do you want me to just talk about it, Jill? Okay.
Yes, by all means.
Yeah, Jill and I have become friends over the years through initially Trauma Therapist 2.0, and we have talked about our experiences one-on-one. And one thing is Jill and I have in common is we have went to on-site workshops in Tennessee for several trainings. And this year I had been to one and in November, and we had a conversation after that. And during that conversation, we were talking about the training, but it also evolved into a conversation about what it's been like to be trauma therapists during this year of COVID. And we had some similar experiences as being therapists in the field. And we also had different experiences. She's working with a certain population and I'm working with a different population, even though we are both trauma therapists. And we just felt like, Guy, you'd had several really, seasoned professionals on early in COVID, and you've had people talking about COVID throughout the process. But I was thinking about, how we've been dealing with it now for, almost a year, and how we feel like now we might be able to talk about it a little bit more. So, and we thought we might share that with you and the people who are listening.
Nice. How about you, Jill? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think everything that Jessica mentioned, it really struck a chord, I think, with both of us when we realized not only the commonalities, but the differences in terms of, yes, we may both be trauma therapists. We do serve different populations of people. And yet some of the very core experiences that we were having were very similar. And it just sort of, I think it was Jessica's sort of brilliant idea to, hey, this might make a really good podcast to offer what it's like to walk in our shoes. And I think from there, she reached out to you and sort of pitched the idea of, hey, let's have some therapists on a podcast talking about what it's like to be a therapist in the middle of the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And well, first off, just want to give a little shout out to Onsite. Um, we've I forget who I had on from Miles.
Miles, Miles Eckhart.
So right, okay. So if anyone's interested in learning more about Onsite, they can go check out that episode. But give us a real snippet of what Onsite is.
I've been there for training. So they do training for therapists, but they also do week-long intensive therapies, both in group and for individuals. And they also have a residential trauma program there.
To treat people.
To treat
Cool.
people with trauma.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's in Tennessee, down by Nashville.
Okay. So, well, Jessica, let's start with you. What was it about that training that kind of inspired you to reflect and or reach out to Jill and say, this stuff is going on?
Well, this year has not given me a lot of time to reflect. And that's been really a huge challenge. When I always hear echoing in my head the people who were both on this podcast and my professors that said that as a trauma therapist, I need to do my own work. And this year had been incredibly hard to do any of that because I was just surviving myself. And fortunately, I was able to go to two trainings at Onsite in person. Of course, we were all taking COVID precautions, but it did give me an opportunity to kind of get away from everything in my life and learn. Whereas I was having a really hard time at home reading books, listening to podcasts, anything. So when I went to this particular training, it was experiential training and we were doing like hands-on work. We as participants were given the opportunity to do our own work. And so as I was doing my own work, I learned some really important things about myself, and I was able to do some things that I never would have been able to do had I not removed myself from, my life and all the things that were going on with COVID. So, I wanted to share this with Jill because Jill had also been to a training like this, and it's very unique. And so as we were talking about, the things that we had worked on for ourselves, it brought up things that about our experience in the here and now that was really relevant to what's going on. So,
yeah.
Okay. I want to come back to you, Jessica, but Jill, so what was your take? What did you feel? What did you want to share? And what do you want to share?
Well, I think, one of the things that this conversation helped us to unpack was what it's, the importance of as a trauma therapist doing your own work. We had both attended the Onsite Leadership Academy, and we talked after that when Jessica went there, and then we talked again after she went to the Experiential Training Institute, of which I had attended a couple years before. And so I think the whole concept behind, being able to do your own work in the midst of this pandemic is very difficult, because when you're surviving in the way that we have been, or I can't speak for Jessica, but I got the sense that, she said she feels the same way, in the sense that we are, doing this work in the middle of sharing a common experience with the very folks that we're serving. And so it was important to me to reflect today as we talk, that there's just this parallel experience, unlike anything else, I think, perhaps that any therapist has experienced. That's kind of a grand thing to say, but I would venture to guess that's probably accurate, that nothing we've ever experienced is like this past year of walking alongside of people as they're struggling, while also struggling with the exact same or similar struggles.
Yeah. Yeah. Jill, when you talk about, doing your own work, what specifically are you talking about? Or, what hit home for you, or something that you felt or realized when you were doing that training, and that is impacting you now?
Sure. So I think what hit me home for me when I've done the trainings is just the importance of understanding how our brains are wired, and just how important it is, and how our bodies are wired, and how our bodies hold on to things. And I've gone to on-site now a couple of different times, and they really impress upon people the importance of understanding sort of the different, like the triune brain model, and how each level of our brain, or each part of our brain, is impacted by our experiences, and more specifically, the painful events that we've been through. And it just really, and both the training and the on-site leadership academy, learning about that, and learning about, like, I'm dating myself here, but those commercials from like the 80s, this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs.
Hmm.
Well, I feel like the slant that they gave is, this is your brain, and this is your brain on trauma. And really normalizing that when we go through painful or adverse life experiences, that our brain and bodies respond in very normal ways. And our situations may be very different, the things we've gone through, what we've experienced, and yet the way our brain responds is very, very similar. And so really understanding that from my own journey, and uh, being able to articulate that to other people, and help shame them, in the sense that, this isn't them. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with necessarily with them. This is just how their body and how their brain is responding to an abnormal situation.
Right.
And so, yeah, being able to go to on site, and being able to learn that from a experience, from my personal journey, and then being able to be like, wow, that was so impactful. I want to be able to impart that, or offer that to other people.
How about for you, Jessica? What was it in terms of like doing your own work specifically that, well, just what was it specifically about that?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, you talked about doing your own work and the importance of that at on-site. What was it specifically about doing your own work? Was it just simply taking the time to reflect on your own experience? Was it uh, realizing maybe, you know, you wanted to become more vulnerable as a therapist, or whatever? What part of doing your own work kind of jumped out to you?
Mhm. Well, I think that there are several aspects to. I had no brain space to think about those things before I went, and I have a very full life. I've got a family. I'm very busy, and so when I went down there, I remember they had us like write out, like, what are some things that how are you feeling now? How do you want to feel later? And those particular things that I recall were things about, like, kind of like feeling spiritually stunted, feeling kind of like, feeling like I wasn't, I was struggling with hope. And then, and then, I was hoping to grow in those areas. Sometimes you can't even, I can't even think about where I'm at and where I want to go unless I
Right.
have some headspace. So I had the headspace to do that. And then, if I go to anything, like whenever I go to anything, I want to like have the answer before I leave. I don't know if you do that. But that, so I wrote those things out, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm feeling kind of spiritually stunted. I want to be like spiritually sprinting by the time I leave. And I'm feeling kind of hopeless. I want to feel totally hope filled before I leave. And what was good about going there for me as a therapist and as a human being more than anything was to
Mhm.
just give myself some starting points. And, because it was all hands on, I was able to get out of, it kick started my body was moving, and then that kick started my brain to sort of keep going. And when I left, I hadn't got all the way. It reminded me in some ways of how far I have to go, but it gave me some movement that did give me hope, and that did give me some spiritual kick starting that I needed.
When you initially talked about coming on here, you said that you realized that there were some commonalities in your experiences and differences. What were some of those commonalities that we're talking about here?
Specifically, I won't, we are both parents. We have children at different ages, but there has been a struggle as females who are working. I don't know, I personally had a child that came home, was in school, and I was, had to do homeschool, and Jill had to do something different. And Jill, I don't know how much you want to speak to that, but you did have to make some adjustments as in your role.
Yeah. So in my world, my son is, at the time, he was just shy of, I think, 5 months, 4 months. And so he was in daycare. And so I had to make a decision about, I'm a full-time working mama who just came off of maternity leave, having put her son at the daycare. And, was in a position to, do I leave him in daycare or do I bring him home? Well, I can't really bring him home because I'm a therapist who was given, we had about 4 to 5 weeks where, many people were sent home to work from home for our own safety and that of our patients that we serve. And so it was just a real struggle for me in the sense of that personal versus professional versus, how do you there's no script for any of this.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very real moment where I had to follow the advice that I give to people, in the sense that when you feel frozen or stuck, those emotions often sound silly to say, but they need motion.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally was frozen for about a week or so of just not sure, when all this hit in late March, just not really sure where to go. And I just went outside in the backyard. It was nice. I did some yoga. My husband was watching after our kiddo, and just needed to move, and, very mindfully. And so there, that's a very real, experience that I even still look back on, because after that, I felt unstuck in the sense that I didn't feel so frozen, in indecision with what to do.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate both of you sharing that. It's so easy, I think. Well, I don't think, I know, for me at least, it's so easy to get into this like survival box of what you need to do to survive during this time, especially. And the days go on, the weeks go on, and you get your little routine in. And then I realized, like, at the end of the day, I've had zero time for myself. And when I'm at the end of the day, when I'm sitting down on the couch and the kids are upstairs in bed and I'm sitting next to my wife, it's like, oh, I can just exhale. I'm like, man, I needed to do more of this. But one of the things I'm curious about for both of you is, in terms of, working with your different populations in trauma, which is so, what has that done? How do you feel you've either been able to be effective or not effective during this time with all these demands and inabilities to have that own, your personal reflective space?
Well, so for me, I've had to sort of toggle between in-person work at the VA, which is very different than working from home when we telework, and we offer VA Video Connect sessions, and that it's very different when you're doing in-person sessions and you're wearing a mask and you're wearing eye protection, and the people you're seeing are sitting, that 6 feet away. They're also wearing a mask. And, for us as therapists, I can't credit who said this, so it's not me, but I heard it said somewhere that when people are wearing masks, it's like a surgeon doing surgery with their non-dominant hand. Hmm. And so, so often in person, I will miss the micro expressions that I actually pick up on during video calls. Conversely, when I'm in person, even though people are wearing a mask, I can see their full body. And so I can see if their foot is tapping or if their knees begin to shake when they're talking. So what's been interesting is sort of that the dance between, the in-person and figuring out how to navigate that space as a therapist, and how to, when you're somebody that really, in the orientation that I like is, it's all about learning about the brain, but also incorporating the body and incorporating the body. And so, it's been interesting for me to learn the nuances between the in-person versus the video. Interestingly enough, as the VA, when they rolled all of this out, it was very seamless in the sense that we were all learning to offer video sessions and giving veterans the choice of coming in person or video connect or even phone at the very start. Now it's mainly video or in person. And what's been interesting is some veterans have really preferred the video connect sessions, which is something that I think was sort of a surprise, because it was sort of my thought that people would want to come in person.
Why do you think that is, that they prefer the video?
I think because when you're working as a trauma therapist, and just so you're working with people who have been through painful experiences, it takes a lot of energy to come somewhere. And so I work in the middle of Missouri. And so a lot of people we serve aren't just from Columbia, Missouri, they're from other places, sometimes an hour, 2 hours away. So if you think about it as like a gas tank, there's only so much energy in your gas tank. And if you're using it to drive to the VA, park your car, put your mask on, go get your temperature checked as you're coming in, walk up. I work on the second floor, go to the second floor. So that takes up a lot of energy. And when you think about like some of the factors that keep people from coming to therapy, avoidance is one of them. And so if you're going to use up all that energy, it's pretty easy just to be like, I'm out. Right. And so for video connect sessions, people said, like, I'm at home, I have my dog, I have my cat, I have my coffee, I'm wearing my PJs or whatever. They are in there, if they're at work and they go out to the car, even, they don't have to use their energy to get to me. They can use it for the session.
How about for you, Jessica? How has this impacted you, therapy you're doing and so forth, and your sense of, efficacy as a trauma therapist and so forth?
I think, I want to also, say that Jill's a little ahead. She's ahead of the game in me in terms of like her years on the job. This is literally my second professional year, and so this is like I'm still learning what kind of therapist I am. I'm still learning what is appropriate expectations for change. And so, like I think I was very discouraged because my clients were discouraged that they weren't making progress during this time in the ways that they wanted to. And I could, feel that sort of, and it was all grist for the mill, right? We would discuss it, but it was hard for me. I can't deny that, like, I felt like I was ineffective often because of what I was dealing with. I mean, I felt like a lot of times though, I was like proud of myself because I was like, hey, I'm still being able to be present and show up and care about these people. But I wanted to, we had been, a lot of my clients, we've been like working together for a year or something like that, a lot of them. And then this hit, and then, sort of like, so the progress that they had been making in certain areas of their life was really challenged when this hit. And that, I felt that for them too. And that was a real challenge for me.
Mm-hmm. In terms of commonalities, you obviously working at different locations and with different populations. What are some of the commonalities you realized you guys were both experiencing?
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but I think one of the things that we brought up, had to do with the fact that, it does take a lot of energy to work on, having all the different roles that we both wear. And then, having to sort of regulate, our own nervous systems so that we can come into our therapy sessions as sort of even keeled as possible, and sort of the demands that, it took. I remember in a meeting at one point during the past year, I think it was the summer, is somebody had mentioned self-care, and I just sort of laughed because it was like, self-care. And yeah, it just really drove home this idea that, it really does, as a therapist, as a trauma therapist, we really have to keep our nervous systems, in check. And I think we both at times have struggled. I think, Jessica alluded to that very early on as we were talking earlier, is sort of in the analogy I give. Some days I feel like I'm just sort of keeping my head above water, with all the things that are going on. And, just really being mindful of, what that's like, and how do we as therapists, find the time, create the time. Um, how do we navigate this?
Yeah. And before you answer that, Jessica, I just want to ask both of you this question. As you're talking, Jill, I'm thinking to myself, to what degree do you share that? Do both of you share that with your clients? A sense that, I'm we're all barely hanging on here. I mean, let's face it, this is crazy. But to what degree do you share that with your clients? Is that something you bring in and create as a commonality? What's your take on that?
I think, depending on the person, depending upon where they're at and where they are in their healing journey. My son was exposed, over the summer to COVID. And so there were some people that I shared that with, and there were some people that I didn't. But in part, it is what happened. And I had to take time off to be be at home with him. Conversely, I will, when I talk with people about the importance of grounding exercises or things that they can do to really kind of get back in their window of tolerance if they're outside of it, I will practice them with them, as far as like, hey, let's do some breathing exercises to start. I'm noticing that you're looking a little nervous. And, they may not know, well, they will now, but they may not know that, I am sometimes feeling just outside my window of tolerance as well. And so I'm doing it with them, not so that they don't feel so weird, although that's part of the reason why we often do exercises with those we serve. But I'm also doing it to kind of get my nervous system in check.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Jessica?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, I mean, this is a second career for me. In my first career, you could have just shared with everybody. Like, I mean, it's very different. We have a very different life in which our job is to join with our clients, but also get out of the way. And I have,
Right.
I know that we have to pivot depending on what's going on in life, right? But like, I was isolated, myself. I was so isolated that the majority of the people I was talking to were my clients, and I couldn't say a lot, because that's not what you're not there for that, right? But it was hard. And so, I tried to be real, but I certainly did do some withholding, because that's what you have to do in this field. And I think it was healthy and all that, but I just want to say it out loud because I do think it's different. Like, I do think we have a different job where we can be real without sharing too much. And, I mean, I had clients say to me sometimes, like, you look really tired today. And I'd be like, yeah, I mean, but I have been, I've been careful, I feel like even to have this conversation with you is really important. But because we're therapists, there are certain things that we will still need to keep in mind as we're having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I'm not like, worried about in talking to you is that I have a father in a nursing home. That's been something I've been dealing with this whole time. That's been a real struggle for me because I haven't been able to see that person. Um, and that's been something that's just kind of like been one of these surface level things that like I've carried this year that is okay because that's part of my life, but definitely not something that, I've been, personally sharing with my clients.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. It's Jessica, when you said the job is to join, but then get out of the way, it seems so, uh, on a good day, I think being a really effective therapist, excuse me, is extremely challenging. It's simple, but it's not easy. As you both have said today, and many of my guests have said, um, it requires this kind of dance of being in the moment, but also being very mindful of things you learned, things having that toolbox at the ready, but not sitting, guarding your chest and you clinging to it too tightly. Um, it it just seems, and made all the more difficult by COVID, this experience. Jill, you're talking about eye protection and face. It's crazy.
Yes. I can't even imagine what it must feel like to see me and to be on the other side of me, because I feel like I've taken pictures of myself, but it's just like, I don't even know how, therapeutic that is. I mean, it's got to feel weird to be in a seat, in the seat across from me. And, it is what it is, though. I mean, we do the very best with it.
Do you feel, and let me ask you first, Jill, and then Jessica, do you feel that this, you know, I keep using the word crazy time, but for me, it's been anxiety producing. It's been definitely, scary with COVID and the numbers and everything. Do you feel as a therapist, it's made you more or less, fill in the blank? Has it made you more want to share? Has you made you keep things closer to your chest? Do you think it's made you a better therapist?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things, adjectives that come to mind. I think, yes, it definitely makes me a better therapist, because I think that it's sort of like that analogy of, when you want to hold on to something, an outcome or control, even that the more you open up your hands and realize how little you do control. If you're holding on to sand, for example, you hold on to more sand when your hands are open than if you cling. And so for me, going back to that early image of me just sort of letting go of the control that I was trying to have back in late March, and just realizing there's only so much that I can control. It's sort of like, I'm going to butcher that Viktor Frankl quote about, in between stimulus and response, there's the space, and you get to choose. I feel like that's a very parallel experience that people have, that we work with, who have been through painful events, is that, you want to control things, or you want to have a specific outcome, or you think what it's going to look like. And I think Jessica alluded to this when she went to on site, of wanting, this is what I feel like now, but this is what I want to leave with. And for me, I've just had to sort of, each day wake up and recognize, what is in my control, what is not, and how do I use that space in between, as Viktor Frankl would say, is how do you cope with that, and how do you manage that? And often there is no path, there is no script, which is sort of like healing, right? Like it's not linear, it's often up and down. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. I've certainly been on that as a therapist in the last year, where I've had moments where I've done really good work, and then moments where I was like, oh, I don't know how that session was experienced, and I don't know.
How about for
So
you, Jessica?
Yeah, wow, you have such a way with words, Jill. I just appreciate you so much.
ditto.
I feel like it's been, phases. So I feel like COVID has been phases. So I haven't really come to the conclusion of what it has done to me ultimately, except for how I'm feeling right now. But, the first 3 months, I really struggled. I mean personally. And so that, when I was struggling personally, I wasn't my view of how I was doing clinically was colored, right? So I was able to fortunately get feedback from my supervisor, and that I was doing well, but it sure didn't feel like it. Like, I just didn't feel like anything was doing well. However, I do really resonate with what Jill says as well, about letting go of some things and letting go of control, because I was one of those that was like, I will never do video sessions. And sometimes when you say never, that's just a setup for what you're going to do later. That's why I never say I'm not going to run. Like, just not trying to set myself up. But anyway, like I did, so then then I had the summer phase, where I was kind of like, I could go outside and I was like coping differently. And I felt like, I don't know what has ultimately happened yet, but I am definitely yeah, I don't know what's happened to me yet. I don't know what to say. I feel like it's the most honest thing for me to say to you is I don't know how it's all turned out yet, but I'm still hopeful that it's okay.
When you said you struggled personally, what were you,
I
struggling
mean,
with specifically, if I can
I
ask?
yeah, absolutely. I was struggling with anxiety and depression just terribly. And when this all,
Because of COVID?
yeah,
And
when,
yeah.
in the first week when the state of Illinois shut down, my husband lost his job. My daughter was sent home from school, and
Mm.
I was sent home to do teletherapy. And, I've got a child who needs a lot of extra help. And I was locked in a room, trying to do confidential sessions. And then my husband, fortunately, he was able to get another job really quickly, but he had to work a lot of hours. And that was a big change for me. And so, I was having just a really strong reaction to change, so much change in such a short amount of time. And it took about 3 months for me to kind of get out of that. I mean, I was really struggling. So,
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. It just reminds me of, and I think I shared this, when all this hit, I was, I got so anxious with the news and this like
Mm.
impending pandemic, and we're all going to get it. And I got so nervous, and to the point where I was like, both the kids were home. My wife,
Mhm.
fortunately, was able to work, but here I was. Whereas normally I would, like everyone else, I guess, who worked from home, have that space. Now I didn't have that space, but now I had to take care of these two young kids going nuts with the anxiety of potentially catching this thing.
Mhm.
And I realized, wait a minute, I'm not going to be able to survive if I continue doing what I'm doing. So I just like had to stop
Mhm.
reading the news, looking at the
Mhm.
news, listening to the news, and that helped a lot. But still, it's I definitely feel, and I think many of us do, this underlying, thrum of anxiety, this backdrop
Mhm.
of anxiety. It's really hard, and I think we've all seen some of those articles about, the mental health fallout. What's going to happen
Mhm.
when all this kind of dies down and ends? And man,
yeah.
Yeah, and to add to what you're saying, I think, not only the mental health of just our whole society in general, I would even add the mental health of our mental health providers. Because, while we may not necessarily, maybe some of us are, but some of us, we may not be the front lines, we're still seeing an influx of people coming in. And, there was a period of time where I was seeing so many new people that, it's gotten to a point where, it takes me a while sometimes to get into a rhythm with some folks as far as like weekly sessions and things like that. And so, that does take a toll when you're feeling, already with COVID and the stress and the anxiety that goes with that. And then you're seeing more people than perhaps like, you've ever seen before. Again, I came off maternity leave. And so my clinics were ramping back up from being gone. And then they ramped up in a way, that I'd never seen before. And I would just add that, I think we have to be careful of sort of I think it's the silent pandemic of our
mhm.
mental health, behavioral health workers that, nobody's really talking about that. I've seen a couple of articles or people have shared that with me. But I do think we have to really pay attention to those of us who have been, who have been tasked almost to continue doing the work that we're doing without much of a break. Whether it's, a lot of us went from in-person to telehealth. Some of us are back to in-person and toggling back and forth. And um, I don't know that people are talking about that enough.
As we get ready to close out here, and first of all, I just want to say it's been awesome having you both on here. I can't believe we haven't done this sooner. I'm blaming both of you. You know, I know there are a lot of people listening to this, whether they're driving or whatever, and they're feeling like, oh my gosh, finally someone's sharing the truth about how they're feeling. What would you say, Jessica, and I'll start with you. What would you say to people who are still struggling? Just, people who are in it, who are doing it, therapists who are doing what you folks are doing. What would you say to them?
I think I would take the phrase from Onsite, which is trust the process. I think the last thing I want to do is put pressure on anybody that they have to do anything or they need to do anything. I think we're all in process and it's okay.
So trust the how whatever's happening for someone.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that the process is good, that we're going in the right direction, that things are happening for a reason. And I mean, not to invalidate anybody's feelings, but I just think it's okay to feel however we are feeling and they are feeling right now.
How about for you, Jill?
I think what I would offer to anybody listening would just be in a similar way of Jessica saying, and it's just sort of, being where you are, wherever that may be. And sort of the idea, the be here now, and the other thing I would offer is just never underestimate the power of your breath. That's my word for the year, is breathe. Right. So it's this whole concept behind, as therapists, or at least for me, I don't just invite people to consider different things that might help regulate their nervous system. I also practice it. I meditate, I, breathe, I, try to feel my feet on the ground if I'm really, depending on whatever's going on. And so I think just remembering to breathe. And even if it's just a deep breath and a slow exhale, that can change so much.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both for coming on here. I think at some point we're going to have a part two, and hopefully the news within the world will be a little more positive. But it's been great having you both on. I want to thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, and thanks, Jessica, for creating this idea.
You're welcome.